You have probably heard of grey extraterrestrials, the ones with big heads, black eyes, small bodies, slender limbs, etc. I have heard numerous accounts of alleged extraterrestrial encounters over the internet. Of course, I never actually believed any of these stories myself. I found the concept of grey aliens very interesting, and slowly began to have some belief in the subject. Actually, I more or less pretended to believe, and it was fun to believe. Deep within me though, I never truly believed in the existence of grey aliens or any kind of extraterrestrial life in our solar system. That was until a disturbing event took place in my life, an event that I cannot forget. I'm sure that if this were to happen to you, you would feel the same way. Here is my story. 10 a.m., November 25th, 2012. A friend and I were on Thanksgiving vacation from our jobs, and we took a trip to the border of New Hampshire and Vermont. We decided to take a hike through a long trail that ran through a river after breakfast. We then decided to camp out on the trail for a night, despite the warning that you were not supposed to camp out on the trail after dark. We walked the trail for about 35 minutes or so, and decided to take a water break near a large rock. As we secured our backpacks, I noticed a plane in the sky. The object was moving awfully fast, most likely a jet. There were many jets that flew in the area. My friend pointed out that there was no trail of smoke coming from behind the jet. I figured it was a military vehicle of some kind, and we simply continued our walk through the trail. We then walked the trail for another 45 minutes or so, and found the perfect clearing to set up our small tent. We were now half a mile off the trail. My friend and I set up our tent and gathered large chunks of wood for our fire to roast marshmallows. As my friend was gathering wood, he pointed out a strange clearing in the woods, larger than the clearing where we had set up the tent and deeper in the woods. There seemed to be a white chalk-like substance on the ground in the shape of a near-perfect circle. Some of the grass around the circle was brown and dead. This spooked us for a few minutes, but we were not about to let a weird little circle in the woods scare us away from our vacation. We gathered our wood and lighted our fire. We wanted to be sure that we got inside the tent and in our sleeping bags before dark at around 5 p.m. to make sure that no one would see us if they came looking for us, such as the park rangers. We roasted our marshmallows and put out the fire at around 5 p.m. and got into our sleeping bags inside the tent a few minutes later. We quietly told each other scary stories, such as the legends of the Bigfoot and other rumoured creatures said to lurk in the Vermont area. These stories I learned from the Vermont Monster Guide by Joseph A. Citro. The night was extremely quiet, just the way we wanted it. I fell asleep around 9 p.m. or so. All through the night, I thought I heard rustling in the woods. Eventually, I woke up at around 12:30 a.m. My friend was sound asleep. I looked outside the tent and saw 2 or 3 deer run by about 17 or so feet away from the tent. I do not know what caused the deer to run so fast. They were obviously afraid of something, most likely a bear or some nocturnal predator, so I went back to sleep. At 2:30 a.m, my friend woke me up to tell me he heard a loud screech that woke him up from his sleep. I told him about the deer that I saw running a few hours ago, supposing that the screech could have been related to the frightened animals. I also remembered that some of my stories spooked him, so I figured that he could have just been messing with me. I did not hear the screech, so I took that as a possibility. We then noticed a light far off in the distance, coming from the direction of the trail. Fearing that it could have been a park ranger, we hid in our tent and kept extremely quiet. But then I realized that the park rangers were not on duty this early in the morning. We were worried that it could be the flashlight of a lost hiker, yet we were both afraid of what could have possibly been emitting the light. After a few minutes, we decided to go investigate the light. We saw the light move as if it were a person carrying a flashlight. We then noticed that the light was red and extremely small. The light came closer and closer. We then decided to turn on our flashlight, and my friend yelled out, "Hello out there, are you lost?" I then remembered the strange clearing that we saw in the woods yesterday, and thought that maybe it had a connection with the object that we saw in the sky, the running deer, and now this mysterious light. I also remembered the stories I heard about grey extraterrestrials and unidentified flying objects. There were also a few stories about aliens in the Vermont Monster Guide. I was still hesitant on believing that the mysterious phenomenon we were experiencing was created by extraterrestrials. The light came closer and closer until we could make out the shape of a humanoid figure walking towards us. We were both terrified at the moment and wanted to go back inside our tent, but we couldn't. We were both so terrified, yet fascinated by the figure. As the figure walked closer and closer, we noticed that it was about our height and only about half an inch or so shorter than myself. We could not see the overall shape of the figure, but it could see us. It was shining the light on us, as if examining us like a doctor in a hospital. As the figure shined its light near our faces, we could see, out of the blinding red light, a face with large, soulless eyes, lacking any sign of an iris or pupil. Its eyes peered at us, and we ran inside our tent in horror. We hid inside our sleeping bags, covering our heads for hours as it would seem, hoping that the being would go away. I knew it was true. Grey extraterrestrials were real. The being stalking us was a slender grey alien, and the object that we saw in the sky was possibly a UFO or flying saucer. The clearing that we saw was possibly created by the spacecraft, and the running deer were afraid of the grey. After several hours, as it would seem, my friend got out of his sleeping bag and opened the slightest opening in the tent zipper, ever so slowly. He was checking outside to see if the being with the red light was gone. I poked my head out from my sleeping bag in terror, and he turned around and said to me, "It's gone." Just then, an extremely bright white light shined behind him, coming from outside. I watched in terror as he was lifted into the air slowly by the light. He was then dropped to the ground outside in a flash and lifted back up straight into the air. I lost sight of him, and the light went out in a flash. Everything was as quiet as before, and I went back to sleep, crying in horror inside my sleeping bag, with the top of the bag rolled over my head so I could not see anything. I woke up the next morning, trying to recall what happened last night. I remembered my friend was lifted by a bright light. There, in his sleeping bag, I saw him sleeping soundly. I was afraid he was dead and woke him up. I asked him about what had happened last night, and he did not recall anything that I told him. I did not bother to report the event to the rangers or anyone else on the trail. Ever since then, I have not had any encounters with anything extraterrestrial. My friend does not recall the events, and the clearing in the woods was gone. I thought that maybe I was dreaming. But there, on the ground, near our tent, was another clearing. This clearing was much larger than the one before and had the same white chalk-like substance on the ground with dead brown grass in several places. My friend and I drove home, and I never told this story to anyone else until now.